seems to report he has a lot of feats. He thinks he beat Synth. He thinks he beat Ariana's. He thinks he beat Venus. He thinks he beat all these other people. And I'm just here to really call that claim into scrutiny in the marketplace of ideas. We're going to test if he has the intellectual, financial capability to really fund the argument that he's going to give against my argument for veganism. So, yeah, I'm going to give him the chance to introduce himself now. Hopefully he gives a good introduction and we can get straight into the meat and the potatoes with gravy. So, yeah.
Yeah, this guy used one of my lines at the last part, and the whole entirety of that little lecture was just terrible. So just to get to the actual substance here, right, you're holding the position that it is the case that apparently it is immoral under the case scenario to eat animals, whereas it is not necessary. So what's the argument for the claim?
Yeah, like the idea is just that I think there's this principle that I think is very reasonable to follow that we should accept. I'm just going to ask if you accept this principle. And the principle is that we ought not multiply suffering beyond that which is necessary.
Why is that the case?
It's a principle, right? Like the idea is like...
I know it's a principle. I'm asking you what's the justification for it. When you're saying it's a principle, are you just saying it's just some sort of like rule you follow, and by rule, what's your definition of rule here?
Well, like a rule is just something that I think ought to be followed, right? And like the reason why it's a bit weird to ask.
So it's just what's okay. So by rule, you just define the rule to be that would
like, I
see
could
the
give you
person.
Examples. I could give you examples where I believe. Sorry, I could give you examples.
I don't care about the examples.
Why does it?
Okay, yeah, moderation. I can get a moderator. I can get a moderator.
I don't know why Ruslan is definitely.
I can get a
moderator. If Ruslan ever mutes me, if Ruslan or any person ever mutes me, I'm making it clear. I'm giving a warning for the owner. I'm not talking to you, Ruslan.
Don't talk over me.
The only person, one person, I don't care if you're mid-sentence here. I ask you for a definition, you're going off into example.
Nobody can hear you.
Let's not deal with the subject, okay? So on the actual definition, your definition of the rule actually is just the type of thing where you see the person follow. This is a
put a 1 in the chat. Put a 1. A 1. I want to see any ones if you can hear a follow. Anyone? 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 We can hear you, boy. We can hear you, boy. Everybody can hear you, boy.
Let's give the argument.
Everybody can hear you, boy. Talk, I'll give you the argument. Don't talk over me. Don't talk over me.
Give the argument. Give the argument.
Bro, I'm just gonna mute. Wait, I'm gonna mute both of you. I'm gonna mute both of you.
I'm talking. We can hear you. Mumble.
Wait, I'm gonna mute both of you. Just get a moderator. I'm not saying that you need to get me as moderation. I'm not even being biased because I muted both of you. Just get a moderator. Like it's that easy, but just get a moderator.
Who do you guys want as a moderator? Like you guys
I think you want a moderator.
Yeah, I would agree to OP think as a moderator or someone who's not a part of the syndicate. I
want to be muted. I was
though for the audience.
I was mid-sentence.
My sentence. I was mid-sentence. So hypocritical, by the way. But just to be clear on one thing,
can we have a muted, please? Thank you. Look, Apollo is one of the leading members of Stop Talking. I want to mute it. I want to mute so I can give the argument. Right? CEO of the Bloviation Corporation wants to cut me off 30 seconds into the goddamn debate. You swine! Don't do that again. What I was going to say was, A, it's a principle. I asked you to accept the very basic moral principle. Hey, do you think that we should avoid multiplying suffering when we don't have to multiply the fucking suffering? You said, who's the argument for that? What dumb fuck. But anyway, the argument for that is just going to be that there's a list of cases where I believe that it's salient, right? That in all of these cases, the reason why we find these cases to be abhorrent is because suffering is being multiplied beyond that which is necessary. And if you agree that in these cases, this is the thing that sticks out to you, which I'm not even sure at this moment because you're a retard, but if you agree that these are things that stick out to you, then you should agree with the principle. It's that simple. Now, if you want the cases, right, if you want those cases, then let me know and I'll give you those cases. But if you don't want the cases, then we can end up here because like you're a retard, you're disagreeing with a very basic fucking principle.
Let you finish? Okay, gotcha. See, that was just embarrassing. You're trying way too hard to so, in other words, you have not really given an argument to the claim that we ought to follow the specific principle you're stipulating here. In fact, your definition of what it means for something to be a principle or a rule is just something which I see the person follows. Really dumb, idiotic definition, by the way. But irrespective of the preparatory nature of the definition, you have not given any sort of like argument for the claim that we ought to follow this principle. That's basically it. And long story short, basically, the reason why I was interrupted in the prior was because I've asked him for a definition and he's derailing it into examples, which is unnecessary to my question.
Yeah, this guy's an idiot. First and foremost, I want to make this explicit and clear. The definition of principle that I gave is something that we ought to follow, something that we ought to act by, something that we ought to adhere to. That's what a principle is, okay? Perfect. Now, the way in which I justify the principle is I give you a list of cases, right? And I ask you, well, do you think this is moral or immoral, right? And if you say, well, I think it's immoral, I'd say, well, it looks like the reason why I think it's immoral is because there is this morally salient feature, i.e., that suffering is being multiplied beyond that which is necessary. Take, for example, child abuse, right? Why do people think that hitting your kid or hitting your child is immoral? It's unnecessary. You're causing suffering beyond that which is necessary. But people that say taking away your kid's phone is immoral, right? Because, well, taking away your kid's phone may cause suffering, but it's not beyond that which is necessary, right? In order to have this good effect. If you're abusing your child, sure, maybe abusing your child could lead to the same effect, but it's multiplying suffering beyond that which is necessary. So it seems like a roundabout way of getting to the same conclusion. And there are a multitude of other examples like this where we both agree, hopefully you agree that child abuse is moral, which I don't know because you think child marriage is moral, but moving aside, hopefully we both agree child abuse is immoral. And I'd say, well, the reason why you probably agree that child abuse is immoral is because of this morally salient feature. And because this feature is present in a lot of other examples, right, we should believe that this feature is immoral, and so we ought to avoid that thing. Pretty simple. Do you have a response to the first example? Do you want more examples? Like, what do you want here? Because I've given you the argument.
Yeah, so I didn't ask for a bunch of examples, I asked for an argument, not examples, dude. So you can give examples of case scenarios where unnecessary suffering is actually immoral, and that would still not justify the claim that in all case scenarios, whereas we were to have unnecessary suffering, it would be immoral. Those two specific, you could say, separate case scenarios don't follow from one another. It doesn't follow from you giving examples of one thing that universally that thing would actually be satisfied in the sense where it would be immoral. To address the other thing, you verbatim said on this recording, we can roll back the clip, you verbatim said that what you define as a rule in the context of ethics is simply the type of thing which I think we ought to follow. Now, that definition is indexing the specific factuality of what is a moral principle to what you think, which is why I responded by saying that your definition is indexical. So for us to then change the definition from, oh, a rule is that which I think we ought to follow, to, oh, a rule is that which we ought to follow, that would be a change of the definitions, and so that would be a retraction and a concession of the first definition. If you want to think that somehow calling someone a retard over and over and calling them an idiot to begin your sentences is something which is optically, you could say, impressive, then you can go off on that, but it's really not optically impressive to anyone who's intelligent and is tracking this debate this far.
Look, it's irrelevant to me whether I look optically impressive. I just want people to know that you're a retard, dumb fuck. You've stumbled into the conversation and you're questioning what I believe is a very basic principle that is, look, man, if there's a situation and we can handle the situation by not making this much suffering, then we should. We should try to handle things while causing the least amount of suffering. That seems like a good thing to do. And I've given you the example, and your response to the example was not to disagree with the example. It was to say, oh, I can agree with all these examples and yet still disagree with the principle. To me, that's a bit silly, right? Because so long as you believe, right, that the excess suffering, the multiplied suffering is unreasonable, then that to me just sounds like saying that's immoral. Like, why would we rationally think that we should multiply suffering beyond that which is necessary without reason? It's not a rational thing to do. And I think acting irrationally to cause suffering is immoral. Maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you think that if we act irrationally without reason, because that's what irrationally means, and we cause excess suffering for no reason, maybe you think that's moral. And if you think that's moral, quite frankly, I don't think you have the intellectual capital to even debate me on this topic, because you've sat here in front of a stage of 40 plus people and said, I personally think that causing suffering without reason is moral, right? And if that's what you think, then we can render it here. There's no point in even talking. You're not going to get the veganist position because you're a retard, intellectually, psychologically impoverished completely. So that's a yes or no question. Do you believe that it is immoral to cause suffering without reason? It's a yes or no question. I want a yes or no answer at the beginning of your monologue, please.
Yeah, 50% of your response is nonsense. The other 50% is just insults. To just lay out the supposed argument that he thinks he's making there. First argument that he has given as to why there's a basic principle supposedly is the fact that, well, I believe it is a basic principle. It's reasonable. I believe it's a basic principle. If anyone is genuinely supposedly persuaded by this low-tier argument, then really and truly I'm concerned about these people's mental health, because that's not even an argument. That's just an appeal to belief. It's just you basically appealing to your personal beliefs and what you think is reasonable and what you think is incredulous, basically, and using that as some sort of basis for the claim there. And that's not an argument, by the way. I can also give you qualifiers which demonstrates why this is not true university. So for one, the average person is not even a vegan. The average person is a non-vegan, okay? With that being said, the average person would definitely agree that they don't need to eat meat. They obviously agree that they're omnivores, they don't need to eat meat, but they choose to eat meat because it tastes good. If you see like You go on the internet, for example, or if you ask the average person in real life and you ask them this very simple question like, do you think you have to eat meat for to survive? They would say no. But then if you ask them afterwards, do you think it is immoral to eat meat? They'd also say it is not immoral. So clearly, the average person does not share the intuition that unnecessary suffering or doing something which is in alignment with this sort of unnecessary suffering is immoral, because the average person have the moral intuition that there's nothing wrong with eating meat. The vast majority of the population in multiple different countries across the entire society on planet Earth is not sharing your intuition about the ethicality of eating animals, about killing animals. So that specifically, if you want to talk about reasonability, if you want to talk about intuition, if you want to talk about plausibility, your specific principle gets debunked by the standard, because guess what? There are exceptional circumstances which contradicts your principle, which is massively intuitive. To address the other part, you've not even addressed or countered how I basically pointed out how your first definition was you indexing it to the idea of what you think, and your second definition was something else. So you just agreed basically implicitly that your first definition was different from your latter definition, and therefore that's another point that you conceded and lost on. The other part now is regarding the idea of you trying to, I mean, I've already emphasized this, the belief part. You know, you have no sort of legitimate argument, and you strawmanned me one of the times. I said specifically, Apollo said unnecessary suffering is moral. No one said unnecessary suffering is moral. What I'm saying, however, is that it is not universally true or universally false. There are particular contexts in which it is moral. There are particular contexts in which it is immoral. If your whole argument is based on the supposed unsubstantiated, weak-ass, trash principle that you made up and pulled out of your anus, which you presented no evidence for, then your argument is nothing really. It's not even worth addressing at this point. This is a fucking joke. That's it, bro.
Yeah, look, to respond to the two dumbfuckery claims that he made, the first thing was something along the lines of, well, look, man, you know, there are a lot of people in society, in different cultures, that both agree that they don't need to eat meat, but yet disagree that them eating meat is immoral. And I'll just say that these people are not rational. That's perfectly fine under my principle. I don't even know why this was brought up, to be honest. I'm not going to waste too much time addressing that. That was like a really low tier response. The second thing he was saying was that I changed my definition, right? Like I said at the beginning, that a principle is something I think we ought follow. And I said a principle is just something we ought follow. If I say we ought to follow it, that obviously is just identical to saying I believe we ought follow it, because to say we ought follow it is just to make an affirmation, right? To say I believe we ought follow it is to just say I believe in this thing. And so once again, I'm making the affirmation. In the same, if I say the sky is blue and then I go on to say I believe the sky is blue, there is no intentional distinction between those two sentences. The only thing that's different is I've made it more explicit what's going on there. Obviously, you're Jamaican, you're not, fluent in English. I understand how you can make that mistake. Just don't make it again in my presence. The third thing is that I made it really explicit and really clear that I wanted a yes/no answer to my initial question before you went on the monologue. You went on the monologue, talked about how my response was gibberish, but didn't actually respond to the question. So this time I'm going to have you forced to respond to the question. I want a yes or no question. Arjun, can you make sure that he answers the question, because it's a leading question. Do you believe that it is immoral to cause suffering without reason? It's a yes or no question. Arjun, please make sure that he answers the question, because it's a leading question. I'm not done with my argument just yet. Go ahead and respond. Give me the yes or no, bro. I want the yes or no. He's thinking right now. He's thinking, how do I
You don't get to dictate who answer the questions I do, so just continue with your response, retard.
Okay, so look, I'm just going to give the disjunction then. So if it's the case that you agree with the idea that it's immoral, then you agree with the principle, because all the principle's saying, right, is just that you shouldn't multiply suffering beyond that which is necessary. And presumably it just wouldn't be rational to do so, right? Like the idea that if I want to achieve this goal, let's say discipline my kid, I want my kid to behave well, I shouldn't go and pluck out each of my kid's teeth individually in order to make it achieve that goal. Because even though that goal may be achieved, the suffering that had to be done instrumental to that goal is just way beyond proportion. I don't need to do any of that. And so it seems like I've done it for no reason, right? In the same way, in the principle, that's all the principle saying, just a subset of the principle. Now, if you disagree that causing suffering without reason is immoral, then there's no conversation. I'm not going to sit here and entertain somebody that believes that it's moral to cause suffering without reason, or amoral to cause suffering without reason, because then you can justify a whole bunch of positions that I believe, and probably the whole VC believes, that is morally abhorrent, that we should not justify. And so that's the disjunction. You can pick which horn you want to take.
Yeah, so just to respond to the first objection he has given towards my supposed legitimate argument, by the way, which he has yet to give for this conversation, he says, it is the case that if these people don't hold to that position or don't hold to my position, they're irrational. Well, clearly that begs the question, right? And first and foremost, we're not talking about the rationality of these people. We're not talking about the rationality of the intuitions. We're talking about whether or not it is an intuition, or whether or not it is intuitive, right? You made the claim that your principle, your basic principle, the idea of this principle being universally true, that is intuitively true. You're basing that off the intuitions and saying that this would be intuitive and it's reasonable to believe. Now, when you realize that the standard of reasonability and intuition, or intuitive nature, by the way, goes against, sorry for that loud noise in the background, goes against the claim that you made, right, or the justification for your claim, then you retract to the intuition standard and just be like, people, or the vast majority of people who has this intuition, by the way, they're just unreasonable because they don't agree with my position. The other point you made, or the other point you made, I should say, you made the point about the idea of belief in something being identical to that thing being true, in the sense where if I say that I think this to be the case, then I'm basically saying that this thing is the case. Well, the difference here is simply that I'm not saying that the belief you have specifically, right, is going to be the type of thing which is not in any way whatsoever indicative of you believing it to be true. However, if you're defining something as this thing is that which I believe to be true, of course, in that specific context, it is definitely semantically distinct from you saying that this thing, by definition, is that which is true, right? For example, it is possible that what you believe to be true is not actually what is true. It is possibly the case that the facts of the ethical domain or the moral domain do not reflect what C believes. It could be the case that C's belief system is systematically flawed. And so, given that definition, it allows for the possibility of falsehood in your beliefs. And so it would not be the case that you stating that the definition of that which is a principle in this context, being that which I believe to be true, would even be identical to you saying the principle, by definition, is that which is true. They are two different things, and you don't want to actually acknowledge that word slip up and the change of the definition given because of the fact that you have an ego and you're uneducated. Last but not least, you talk about the idea, well, if you don't agree with my principle, if you don't agree with this, then I'm not going to have the conversation. So just to reframe that for the audience and see himself, basically what he's saying there is, if you disagree with my claim, if you don't agree with me on this topic, then because I can't prove my claim, I'm just going to disengage and concede the conversation. That's basically it. That's just a cope and another way of saying I can't give an argument, so I'll concede if you disagree with my claims. That's basically just it. So in other words, just to wrap this up, because I've been talking for a bit too long, you've not given any argument for the claim that the principle is even a true principle to begin with. I've given evidence against it, the intuitions of other people, which demonstrates some sort of inconsistency within your claim. And even if these intuitions were not to be good evidence against your position, you've not even presented any good evidence to begin with for your position. So that's it.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is like really crazy. I'm not going to give a response until he answers my question, because if you look in chat at the GIF I sent, all he's been doing is evading the very basic fucking question I've asked him. He responds to everything in the corners, everything in the bits, and he's ignores the centerpiece, the thing that I want him to answer really badly. So, Arjun, please make him answer the question, because he said he was going to answer it. He said, I gotta answer it in my time, not your time, man. I answer it in my time. And he just hasn't answered it for 2 fucking monologues now. So I just want a clear yes or no answer to the question. Is it immoral to cause suffering without reason? Yes or no?
Yes or
If
no?
he doesn't answer, force him to. This is bullshit. He needs to answer the fucking
I
question.
will force you to answer the question, bro. What's the answer?
Diggy, just stop that. Unless I want to debate your server ever again. Shut the fuck up. Just stop talking.
It's a yes. Don't let him talk to you. That it's a yes or no.
Just to address C's question, just to stop talking. It's not a 2v1, it's a 1v1, okay? Remember that. Opie Diggy, remember it's a 1v1, not a 2v1, okay? Just let me roll in the conversation. Yeah, so just go back and mute for a second. Yeah, I know you guys have to dick munch in the server. Just go back and mute, okay? So yeah, just go back and mute, because I know you guys love to dick munch. Go back and mute. I'll continue the conversation when you go back and mute. Okay, Opie Diggy? Okay? I'm waiting for you, bitch boy. I'm waiting for you to go back and mute first.
Listen, you're not calling me that.
You're chewing on your
You're the one who's going on mute, all right? Listen.
Arjun, look, I'll just respond anyway. Look, it's very clear for the audience, anybody in the audience, anybody that ever listens to this recording, if it ever manages to come out of this fucking VC, that this guy is just dodging the fucking question. He's afraid of answering the question. You can hear the fear in his voice as he stutters and stumbles his way out of answering the question, because he knows if he answers the question, his whole position crumbles. That's just the facts of the
I'm
information.
gonna unmute you now. Answer the question, bro. Answer the question.
I've already answered the question in my previous response. Were you guys
Was it
not
a yes or a
listening?
no?
Do you remember the response to your question?
Was it a yes or a no?
Do you remember the response to your question? Yes or no?
That presupposes that there was a response, so I'm not going to answer.
Do you remember the response to the question? Yes or no?
That presupposes that there was a response.
Could you dodge the yes or no question after accusing me of dodging? That's
There was a response.
So you're not responding with a yes or no.
I want
Are
a
you
yes
responding with a
or
yes or no to my question?
I want a yes or a
Are you
no.
responding with a yes or no to my question? Yes or no?
All right, let's ask the chat.
So you're not responding with a yes or no, correct? But you're accusing me for dodging your question for not saying yes or no, correct? So by your own standards, you're not. By your own standards, you're dodging my question because you're not saying yes or no. By your own standards, you're dodging my question because you're not saying yes or no.
Yes or no.
My response to your question, by the way, regarding whether it's moral or immoral, is that it's not a binary question to begin with, because it depends on the particular context, dude. That was my response to your question. So now that I've answered the dumb question you just asked me a while ago, I want to answer my question. Do you remember the response I've actually given previously? Yes or no? You're getting rhetorically manhandled, dude. Like, unironically, you're getting slapped the shit out of you, dog. This is just embarrassing. Like, it makes no sense for you to try to be rhetorical aggressive against someone that's just far better rhetorical aggression. Just relax for a second. Calm down. There's a reason as to why Opie Dingy has to step in the safety dog. You're getting pissed on right now, dog. You're getting bombarded in this conversation. And the only person who ever think for any
Preferably, I like to be muted.
See, he said the answer wasn't binary, right? He said it was like customary to context or something. That's what I heard.
Look, this is stupid. This is stupid. Can you give me, stop talking, nigger? Can you give me one example, just one, where an individual causes suffering without reason and that individual's not doing something immoral? Just one example, please, for the audience.
The example where the individual is killing a chicken to eat it. Yeah. And it's not my burden to prove it is okay. It's your burden to prove it is not okay because you're on the burden here. You're saying it is immoral. So prove that claim. We're still waiting for the argument, by the way. You have not given any arguments. You're trying to deal with the conversation into asking questions because you can't answer my questions. Because you're unable to answer any single one of my questions. You're trying to deal with the conversation into asking me when my beliefs is not relevant to you giving an argument for your beliefs. So again, I'm going to press you one more time. See, you're the person who is not even giving the arguments here. I want you to realize this. I want you to acknowledge this, okay? I'm the one asking the questions, not you. That's going to work, this bitch boy. So I'm going to ask you one more time. We're going to deliver an argument which raises the probability or demonstrates the correctness of the supposed claim to be a correct principle.
So I can give my
Do you have an argument?
response.
Yes or no?
Can we get a mute on the
Do you have
kid?
an argument?
So I
Yes or
can give
no?
my response? Can we get a mute on the kid so I can give my
I'm going
response?
to give a response of the
Right? I want to respond to his case.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to be clear for the audience, the whole dispute in this debate is whether eating animals, right, killing animals in order for them to be eaten is immoral. I asked him, can you give me one case, right, where it is the case that it is moral, or amoral to cause suffering without reason? And he said, oh yeah, it's just the case that we're currently having a dispute over, man. And you have to show me the evidence for why what I'm saying is wrong. The whole point is that it just sounds like your special pleading, right? There are so many fucking cases where people cause suffering without reason, and we say that they are morally blameworthy. We reprimand them. We say we shouldn't do these things. And there's this one fucking case because you're so fat. You have so much fucking blubber in your belly that you can't stand to imagine a world where you just don't kill chickens, right? You have to stuff your face eating so much. So you have to justify that by saying, oh, it's just this one specific case where it's not immoral. Every other case, most other cases I name, they can be moral, but I can't prove that the principle applies here. Obviously, I don't see the symmetry breaker between that case and the case of the kid. We have this goal, right? This goal is, for example, to be nutritious, to be healthy, to have good tasting food, right? All of these goals can be achieved without killing chickens and stuffing your face with them. You can do that without killing them. You have corn meats, right? Corn meats can taste just as tasty as regular meats do, and you can eat those, you can stuff your face with those to be nutritious. You can have a well-rounded diet, you can take supplements, etc., etc. There's a multiplicity of evidence to suggest that vegan diets can also just be as nutritious as non-vegan carnivorous diets. I don't know what goal, aside from wanting to stuff your face with meat, that you're trying to fulfill that cannot be achieved without needlessly multiplying the amount of suffering in the world. But before you give a response, I also want to respond to the other two things you said in the monologue maybe 5 minutes ago that maybe you thought I forget. right? One thing you said was that my definition was changed or something. Quite frankly, I don't even care anymore. Like, I don't think it was changed. I think your example of the truth thing is a case that's disanalogous to my case, right? Because obviously a principle, which is not true or false, is different from what's it called? An affirmation. Right? When I make a principle, like follow this thing, or like this is something we all follow something. I'm giving a prescription. I'm giving a rule because I'm a prescriptivist. I'm giving an imperative. It's not true or false. But your example is true or false. But that's irrelevant. You can put that aside because that's just like an attempt at getting a needless gotcha as relevant. The second thing is the intuition thing. I'm not abandoning the intuition thing. As a matter of fact, I'm even accommodating the intuition thing in my response because that's the basis for them being irrational. The fact that they hold these two conflicting intuitions is the basis for why I believe that these people that do hold the conflicting intuitions are rational. And just to be clear, if you take a moment to look at chat, right, I'm going to send some statistics that actually go against what you're saying. Shout out to Rizhan for the statistics. If you read what it says there, it says from these figures, solidly 70 to 90% of the public believe causing unnecessary animal suffering is morally wrong. So even the statistics disagree with what you're saying. There's nothing to stand on. But somebody can stand in the stage and try and act as if what you're saying is even rationally defensible. All you've done for the conversation is say, hey man, I want an argument for why causing unnecessary suffering without reason is wrong. Causing moral harm without reason is wrong. I don't believe this. I want to stuff my face with blubber and lard all the time. This is uninteresting. If there's an actual response to what I've given you with the cases, where there's a symmetry breaker between the two cases, aside from your fucking fatty intuition, go ahead. If not, we can conclude. This is boring me.
Yeah, it took them long enough to serve you on mute, by the way. So but it's kind of like difficult to make out like majority of what you're saying because you're like venting and crashing out and chewing all of your words, poor articulation right there. So just the actual points you made that I could make out, you talked about the idea of the statistics. So I want the sources for those statistics. They're actual case scenarios. If that's from AI, by the way, there are a multitude of case scenarios where it's AI fake sources. And when you ask them, okay, AI, what actually is the source for the specific statistics? They don't actually have the source, and they actually apologize for, giving false information. So you appealing to someone who had to help you admit the baby because you could not prove your claim, by the way, is not going to help you out here because that's going to require further justification. The other parts you mentioned, you talked about the ideal of apparently it being the case that, because I'm fat, because I'm this, because I'm that, that's why I'm bold at this position. So in other words, your whole argument, you could say rhetorical punchline revolves around you accusing me to be obese or something because you can't even prove your own claims. But then that would be indirectly you calling everyone or majority of people in this very same audience, which is witnessing you getting bullied in this conversation as a fat person or fat persons, because the vast majority, if not every single person in this VC, most definitely you included, eats meat. Even though you have the option to eat vegetables only, you guys eat meat. So the whole idea of talking about, it's so morally abhorrent to eat meat, even though I do it and the vast majority of the people here, is actually crazy to me, man. It's just mentally deranged to try to use that as some sort of argument, use audience appeal as some sort of argument, when you damn well know that the vast majority of people on planet Earth, including you, for example, most definitely, eats meat. Now, in other words, you've not given any sort of justification again for the claim about the statistics part. Obviously, that's something which is in question right now. So now we're going to have to present the actual source. Then we're going to have to look at the sample size, see how large the sample size actually is to determine the credibility of the sample size and the credibility of the survey. These are things you have yet to actually gloss over. So I think you're jumping the guns when you're like, here are statistics in the chat, therefore I won the point. No, you've not won it. Just relax your guns for a second. Okay, so the other part, basic principle stuff, you've not even justified that yet. And I mean, you've acknowledged previously that the average person does not have the moral intuition that there's something wrong with eating animals. In fact, when you see someone at a restaurant, for instance, eating chicken or some sort of meat, for instance, right? You don't see them crying. You don't see them like having like a breakdown while eating the chicken and be like, I think I'm doing something wrong. I can't believe, like, the average person is not doing that. The average person is enjoying themselves when they're eating meat. They don't have any sort of moral intuition or sympathy or empathy towards the animal they are eating because they don't give a shit. And that's a fact that anyone can agree on, including your dumbass, by the way. So for you to tell me with a straight face that this position you have is strongly morally intuitive and it just wins out in intuitions, blah, 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 whatever the bullshit you're going to say, that's dumb. That's completely idiotic, as you love to put it, by the way. So yeah, no argument for the principle stuff. No justification for the credibility of the supposed statistics that you need someone else to give you, by the way, because you're losing badly on both argumentation and on rhetoric. And really and truly, it's just a whole bunch of insults, chewing on your words because you have a speech impediment. And it's just really terrible to listen to, honestly. If you have something else to add to the conversation, I would really be glad if you had something else to add. But if not, then I think this conversation, this debate is just a waste of my time. And it's just a very huge death threat to my brain cells because I've not seen anything in this conversation which is intellectually productive. I'm done talking.
Yeah, in the words of Apollo, I'm just going to educate him. I'm going to educate him on why everything he said in that previous monologue is dumb fuckery central, right? Like everything he said, not one thing, in my opinion, attacked what I was saying. For the statistics thing, just use your fat, grubby, lard-smelling fingers. Just press the screenshot. Look on the bottom of the paragraph. It tells you the statistics and the links in which it goes from. I don't think I have an obligation to do that for you and verify whether those statistics actually say what they say, right? I've given you the evidence. The evidence is that there is this source, and this is what the source is. If you disagree, the statistics are there. The sources are there. You can check those for yourself. I've offered you those. I believe that they're true. I have no obligation to go there for you, screenshot it for you, and send it for you. I'm not your dad, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is the principle stuff. All of that jibber jabber about most people in restaurants wouldn't break down. This is like actual harmful rhetoric, which I personally don't think you care about because once again, you agree with child marriage. So this might not be something that you think is abhorrent, but this is the same sort of rhetoric that people would use like 100 years ago or so to justify like things like racism and lynching and, you know, raping your wife. You do realize that back in the day, right, maybe the day that you think we should return to, right, raping your wife was not actually something that was seen as a crime. Like you could have sex with your wife regardless of if the wife wanted to or not. If you went back in that day and you asked people like probably like your great fucking grandfather, wait man, do you think that raping your wife is immoral? People say, nah man, I have sex with my wife whenever I want to. I don't think it's immoral. I don't break down. You're a dumb fuck, man. You know, raping your wife is obviously moral because, you know, none of the people I speak to disagree with it. But they probably agree that we shouldn't do things that are harmful unnecessarily. But they also probably agree that, you know, we should rape our wives. I personally don't give a fuck. I'm not going to be subjugated by what majority of society thinks, morally speaking. If what they think, morally speaking, is obviously morally distasteful. If I went back in time to when pretty much everybody believed that lynching blacks was okay, or killing Jews was okay, or raping your wife was okay, or killing the gay people was okay, I would still say, and I'll still stand strong and say that everything that they're doing is morally abhorrent and they're all dumb fucks. Maybe you would change your view because that's where you want to be. That's your utopia. I wouldn't change my view because it's still morally abhorrent. So stop giving me these examples of, oh, in a restaurant you don't see people breaking down, you don't see people acknowledging the fact that what they're doing is immoral, because their acknowledgement or their belief or their evaluation of their actions as moral is irrelevant and independent of whether those actions are actually immoral or not. Right, that's the thing. So I don't know. Don't mention that again to me. It's like a really low tier fucking response, low tier rhetoric that can be used to justify a lot of harmful shit. I think I've really justified the principle. I'm just going to give the justification one more time. I'm going to give you a chance to answer the question and answer the principle. And maybe if you respond, we can continue. If you don't, we don't have to. The justification was this, right? So we have this case, right? The kid abuse case, child abuse case. I want my child to not end up like Apollo, right? I don't want him to e-sex femboys and tell them to poo in his face and transform into a horse and sit on him and dick him down. Nor do I want him to support child marriage and be like a fake fucking Muslim, murtad on fucking stages and say this dumb shit, right? I want it to be, you know, I want it to be a moral.
This is how like low-tier British or black spook.
Stop talking. You're a jahil. Right? I want it to be a moral individual. I want it to be a kind individual. I don't want it to end up like Apollo, right? And so I can either A, right, you know, take him away from Discord, take away his phone. I could, you know, take him to like a rehabilitation center. Or I could B, I could chain him up, pluck out each and every one of his teeth and like beat him, right? Until he decides to change his ways and change his behavior, right? Both actions can probably lead to the same outcome, right? The outcome is that we don't have an Apollo on our hands, right? Thank God, alhamdulillah, right? But the difference is that one route seems obviously unnecessary. It seems immoral in one case, right? If I have to cause unnecessary, needlessly multiplied suffering in order to stop this thing, when I could do this other method, which causes less suffering and is overall less harmful to the population, right? And most people would say, yeah, man, I agree that disciplining your child is okay. Just don't discipline them in this way that causes suffering. And the reason why is because causing excess suffering is just seen to be wrong. Most people converge on this fact, right? If you agree that it's wrong in the child abuse case, which I'm pretty sure you did, you hopefully agree you shouldn't have child abuse. You hopefully we shouldn't do child marriage. You hopefully agree with all of these things. Then, when it comes to the veganism case, what is the symmetry breaker? What's the difference between killing a chicken, because you think killing chickens, is whatever, good to eat, you want to eat those chickens, whatever, fine. Maybe you're not fat. I think you're fat spiritually on a deeper fundamental level, but that's besides the point, right? What's the difference between that case and the other case where we have child abuse? I don't think you can offer one. I don't think there is a symmetry break. I think these cases are morally equivalent, and so if we're all being rational, we just ought to avoid the suffering in both cases. And so he can have his response now. I don't think it's going to be anything interesting, so I'm going to prepare my conclusion whilst he's giving that response.
Yeah, so just a whole bunch of yapping and no actual substance there. I'm not going to fault you for making retarded points because I already knew before this conversation started you mental disability. So just the first point though, you talked about the idea of, it is the case apparently that we don't care about intuitions. I don't care about intuitions. But then in the justification of quite literally given as to why this would be a basic true principle relies on you stating that the average person have the intuition that unnecessary excess suffering is immoral. So it's kind of just crazy how you just switch the argumentative standards based on when it suits you, when it's convenient to you, right? So on one hand, you're like, Apollo, I don't care about people's intuitions. I don't care if people believe that this is wrong or this is right. But then you're literally doing the opposite by appealing to this as some sort of evidence for the claim that this thing is a basic true principle. Kind of weird, right? They're just caught into a pragmatic or performative contradiction. Not to mention, in the case of unnecessary excess suffering, yes, people agree that generally speaking, this is true. Generally speaking, it is the case that unnecessary suffering, unnecessary excess suffering, by the way, something which is immoral. But I don't grant that they believe it is universally the case. I don't believe that they believe this to be something which applies to the case of eating animals, bro. I don't think that's even true. Because if we look at the average person when they're eating animal, it doesn't seem as if they have the intuition that they're doing something wrong when they're eating animal, dog. That's incorrect, bro. If anything, I just wanted to just pay close attention, bro. Pay close attention to like just the average person when they're eating like chicken, for instance, right? When they're eating chicken, they're not having some sort of moral empathy, bro. Like, take a look at this guy in the freaking gift, bro. This guy that looked like he's having fun, bro. He's just enjoying that meat, bro. Do you think he gives a shit about the chicken he's eating, or like, oh no, I actually killed the chicken, or rather, someone killed the chicken? Bro, we don't give a shit, bro. We're out here rocking, bro. We're out here at restaurants eating chickens and shit. We're not crying over freaking chickens that were killed or factory farm, bro. I don't know what you're on. I don't know what drugs you're on, bro, but you're retarded. Moving on. So the moral intuitions part, right? That's not even something which is working in your favor here. We can grant the idea that yes, it is a strong intuition. It's a strong moral intuition that's unnecessary. Suffering is generally immoral, and agree that this particular instance of there being unnecessary suffering when you're eating animals or eating chicken, to be very specific, would not be something which is in fact immoral. So we can just be a particularist about intuitions, which equally expects the specific thing you're appealing to and undercuts the justification you're given for your argument. You made a couple of other points, brother, a couple of other brain dead, intellectually bankrupt points. I think you made the point about the idea of, well, you're talking about how apparently it is the case that, say, sorry, it wasn't even the fact that you made the other points, because guess what? You are just busy insulting. So the only points you made, I was actually just trying to trip you up right there. The only points you made was you talking about the intuitions part, about people believing this principle to be true. That gets debunked, that gets undercutted. The statistics point, oh yeah, that part, you've yet to actually justify the credibility of those statistics, by the way. You have yet to actually go over the sample size, which, by the way, when you're talking about credibility surveys, we have to place into consideration the sample size. I can't make a claim that 70% of people or 90% of people believes that you could say killing animals is okay based off the fact that 9 out of 10 people I've interviewed in this very same topic believe such. No, you have to have a larger sample size. Sample size is definitely relevant. So you've not even went over the sample size to actually make some sort of, we could say, analysis or evaluation or extrapolation on the moral fact. So that just places into question the credibility of what you're appealing to. And not to mention, not even presenting the source. I've not seen you present the source. The only thing I saw was a random screenshot from ChatGPT, which is known for being wrong multiple times and faking sources and giving misinformation. So no source, no justification, no sort of evidence for the source credibility, no justification for the basic principle claim. In fact, the justification you attempted to give, by the way, failed because you said on one hand, you don't care about intuitions, then the justification you tried to give as to why your principle was in fact correct was based off people's intuitions. You have gotten dog walked, ragdolled, and destroyed on every single point, and that's the reason as to why you're focusing and try to end off your little points by accusing me of being a pedophile, accusing me of doing all of this stuff. Oh, you're dating the femboy. All of these false, debunked allegations, because you're trying to derail from the actual substance, derail from the actual subject, and try to convince anyone who has the attention span of a goldfish that you're winning by just putting the attention towards insults and putting the attention towards the arguments which you should be focusing on to prove your dumb, retarded, autistic claim. So don't disappoint your father and try again, okay? I'm going to give you one last chance to redeem yourself, you dumb fucking idiots, right? Try again. Give an argument this time. Don't disappoint me. Give an argument for the claim. If you're going to just insults which has no rhetorical punchline behind it, then hear what? I'm definitely confident in giving conclusions on this. And by the way, please don't talk about English fluency when you chew over every single one of your words and you have a speech impediment. It's really, really embarrassing. I'm done talking, by the way. You guys can
Finally, guys, our prayers have been answered. I joined hands with every single person in chat, from Official to Gyro to Margie to Rude. We all held hands in order for this guy to shut the fuck up, right? Because majority of what he said was just a repetition of things that he responded to. I'm even a bit unclear on why he randomly invoked particularism. I asked him at the beginning of the debate whether he was a particularist. I'm not sure if the answer to that was a yes or a no. But presumably the particularists can still give justifications for why they have specific moral intuitions. If they don't, then that's pretty weird to me. I mean, it's just like they're saying, I have some more intuition, I have this vibe because I do, I have this intuition just because I do. If that's what's being said, I just find that to be wholly uninteresting, right? Because my critique already supposes you have the fucking intuition. We're just asking whether or not you have justifications for the intuition. If you just lack justification for your intuition, that's the same as, at least to me, to saying you're acting irrationally when you follow this principle, when you follow this intuition. There's no reason to follow it because you have a motivation for why the intuition is true, tracking, or true, or something that ought to be followed or adhered to. That's the first thing. Perhaps what you mean when you say particulars is that you don't think that, moral action should be governed by principles. You think moral action should be governed by case-by-case analysis of the, environment, of the features, so that we can see and identify the morally salient features that can stick out to us. And so it's not really principles that we should be interested in, but rather we should analyze and evaluate morality based on case-by-case situations. If that's what you're trying to say, that's also within what I'm saying too, right? Perhaps it's the case that, we first ought to analyze situations before we come to a moral conclusion. But it seems as if we analyze the vegan case, which, keep in mind, he has yet to give a symmetry breaker between the veganism case and any other case where, we say that the needless multiplication of suffering is harmful, is immoral, is wrong, is something that we ought to avoid to do. He just keeps on going with we just enjoy eating the meat, man. When I go to the gym and I stare at these men pumping that iron, I stare at these men, I stare at these niggas, they eat that meat and they enjoy that meat. You feel me? They're not upset about the meat, they like the meat, right? He just keeps giving these dumb fuck points that I'm completely uninterested in. I don't really justify his position. I agree that people like me, that doesn't respond to anything I'm saying. It's just really unparsimonious. You can't even give it a symmetry break. And if you can't, you're basically saying, look, I agree that it applies generally, but when it comes to my chicken, when it comes to my food, my Jamaican ackee and saltfish, man, I can't, bro. I can't apply it here for no fucking reason. Which, if that's what you want to say, then once again, it's uninteresting. We can wrap it up there. The intuition thing, I don't know why I keep repeating me not following intuitions as if that's like a reductor. What I said was that I accommodate both intuitions. So I think if it's true that most people have these intuitions that, are vegan and anti-vegan at the same time, so they follow my principle, which is about the needless multiplication of suffering, but at the same time they don't follow this idea that it applies to the vegan case, then I think that most people are irrational. And I can say that in a lot of time frames too. If I go back to the Nazi Germany place, right, where people are killing Jews all the time, and I ask them, hey man, do you think it's immoral to needlessly multiply suffering beyond that which is necessary? They probably say no. And if I said, okay, well, if you believe that, the suffering of the Jews is not necessary to having a greater Germany, Lebensraum, whatever, would you think it's moral to kill the Jews? And you probably say no, right? Even if they do say yes, it's still moral to kill the Jews, even if it's not necessary to kill the Jews, then I would still be perfectly comfortable in calling those people irrational people. If I go back to little Jimmy in the UK 200 years ago, who's raping his wife, and I go into him mid-session and I'm like, hey man, I don't think you should be doing that, man. I mean, you're needlessly multiplying suffering. You just wait till she's ready. He's like, well man, when little Johnny and when little Apollo down the street, when they rape their wives, they don't seem like they're having any sort of, qualms with it, man. They're enjoying it. They get their wife and they rape their wife. And so in that case, I don't know if there's anything wrong with raping your wife, because most of society seems to accept that intuition. I don't give a fuck. I don't care if most society accepts intuition, because the intuition is so obviously abhorrent. It so obviously is incoherent with other intuitions that I prefer to preserve. So once again, you have two horns. It's either the case, you take my principle. We needlessly multiply suffering. That is immoral. We should not do such things. And then we also adopt this ethical vegan approach, right? When we don't need to kill animals for food, we don't have to. We just adopt a healthier living, healthier lifestyle. Or B, we can take your horn, right? We can reject this principle applying in this case, and then it seems that we have no justification for why it applies in the other cases, because there doesn't seem to be a relevant symmetry breaker, one or the other. And I think that's probably all that I need to respond to. You're probably going to repeat yourself again, so I'm going to continue right in the conclusion. You can go ahead and respond, man.
Okay, so yeah, just first and foremost, your response to one of my intuition part is just you saying, "Oh, it's a dumb fuck point. I'm not interested in that, so I won't address it." I mean, really good counter arguments. Yeah, I gotta give you props, man. I mean, for someone who talks so highly of his debate skills, for someone who gets blazed by the entire chat, for someone who is supposedly slamming the hell out of Apollo, according to what this Discord chat full of 15-year-old kids, I would expect something much better than this, man. I mean, if your whole argument and your whole response is just you saying that you don't care about the arguments, it's a dumb fuck point, therefore you're going to move on. Really and truly, that would just be you failing to meet your burden of rejoinder. So you officially lost that point. You did not address that argument. Again, you're saying on one hand, you don't care about what people think, but at the same time, you are appealing to what people think to justify the principle. Does that make sense? It doesn't, retard. It doesn't make sense, right? It was a rhetorical question. It doesn't make sense for it to be appealing to this standard in this particular case to justify the principle you believe to be correct. And then you say that the same justificatory standard that you're utilizing for the principle that you believe to be correct is not something which you care about, is not something which you think is epistemically credible. By the way, I never said that what people agree on or what people's intuitions converge with is a necessary condition for what which is moral. I am just saying that it is good evidence for that which is moral. It is good evidence because intuitions are generally true tracking given the concept of evolution. It's more expected under the facts of evolution be the case that intuitions would generally be true tracking because of the fact that intuitions being true tracking will be beneficial towards their survival, which is why human beings generally grant their intuitions because it has this consistent accuracy across most, if not all, domains of being accurate in mathematics and physics and ethics and multiple different topics. So I'm not telling you that merely just people believe that this automatically entails logically, it's logically necessary according to intuitions that this thing has to be moral. I'm saying that it's strong evidence for it. And so the evidence favors my position as it pertains to the ethicality of the action. Now, you just go off on point as usual. You just can't stay on point. It's as if like your attention span is lower than the average TikTok user because you're supposed to be talking about the justification for the principles you have, the justification for your claim about eating animals being immoral, and what you talk about instead? Nazis, it's not okay to kill Jews. What are you talking about? Why are you talking about killing Jews? Why are you talking about raping wives? Why are you talking about any of these unrelated subject matters when your dumbass should be focusing on the actual subject, which is giving us a fucking argument for the claim that it is immoral to eat animals, which you've yet to do. It's been over 20 minutes, over 30 minutes, and I've yet to hear an intelligent argument, a coherent argument for the claim. It's absolutely atrocious performance in your end. Really and truly, I don't think there's anything else I need to even push forward here because you kind of like messed yourself up midpoint when you stated that you can grant the moral particular's position and grant it to be the case that there are particular case scenarios in which this thing would in fact not be the type of thing which is moral. You don't even attack the moral particular's supposition. You haven't even attacked that possible interpretation. You granted it and tried to use the steel manning argument when instead of steel manning your argument, it weakened your argument. It messed up your argument. So not only is it the case that the points you've steel manned messed up your argument intrinsically, but it's also the case that you deliberately, openly ignore my arguments and not even address the arguments. You said you were not even interested in addressing the argument. And also, not to mention, you have not even given, any justification for your claim. So on all of these three tenets and facets of this dialectic, you have failed atrociously. Now, I don't think there's anything else to add because every single time I give you an opportunity to redeem yourself argumentatively, rhetorically, what do you do instead? You spam insults, dog shit, cornball insults, shoot over your words like a speech impediment retard who can't speak properly, and not address arguments, nor do you give arguments for your positions. So there's really nothing of productivity to even be provided from your end because you're known to be unproductive intellectually to this conversation. It's been consistent through this conversation. Now, I don't want to hear ever again from any person who is not showing that this guy is anywhere near my level or is above me or anything or is even beating me in this debate because we know for a fact that anyone who believes this is either mentally deranged, biased, or a combination of both. I think I'm basically done here, bro. I think we just head to conclusions after this because you got wrapped up, bro. Like, this is actually, you got beyond cooked, bro. I'm sorry. You can mute me if he has anything else to say. That said, it's just.
Yeah, I just want to respond to one thing that he added in to try and justify his point because he realized that the point he was making was stupid. I'm going to say this really slowly. Intuitions being evolutionarily advantageous do not on their own mean that intuitions are truth tracking. In order to determine whether it's the case that intuitions are truth tracking, we should think to ourselves, counterfactually speaking, would it be the case that we had these intuitions even if it was false? That whatever these intuitions are tracking were false. Like, for example, would we still have the intuition that eating animals is okay? Would most people have the intuition that eating animals is okay? Which, I don't necessarily agree with, but let's just suppose that that's true. Would that be the case even if eating animals was not okay? And I think the answer to that is yes, we would still have that intuition. And the reason why we still have the intuition is because eating animals, having us eating animals is directly beneficial to our evolution, is directly beneficial to our survival. So like in an evolutionary process, which isn't really, binded to moral processes, even if it's the case in some world that eating animals was immoral, it's very likely that we will still have this intuition that eating animals is moral because, well, it helps us survive. But that doesn't mean that because we have this intuition from evolution that all of a sudden it's justified based on evolution. In the same way, there was a point in time society where a lot of people had intuitions that were racist, sexist, aligned with rape, misogynistic, right? And that's the point of the examples. I know you didn't understand those examples, but that's the point. There were points in society where a lot of people converged on these really horrible, really disgusting, distasteful intuitions. But I wouldn't sit there and say, oh man, well, these intuitions are probably true because of evolution. That's a stupid, retard point to make. It's obviously false too because we would still probably have this intuition, or most people still have these intuitions, even if it's the case that the thing that they were trying to track reliably would be false. And that's all I really had to say. Everything else that he said was a repetition of the things he said before. So do you think we need to respond to that point as well, or can we conclude? It's your choice.
Yeah, I can just give like one more response. Hold on, let me check my. Yeah, so just to address the evolution point, no one necessarily automatically means that it is true. It's just evidence for it being true. We have not even tracked the evolution argument because we know for a fact that given the consistency, we know the consistency of intuition is being accurate, right? For example, you have the sensory intuition that you're talking to me right now. You have the sensory intuition that, you're on Discord right now. You have the sensory intuition of plenty of things. When you're looking at things, when you're utilizing your senses, we use your senses, which are grounded in this immediate sort of awareness and experience, to basically justify claims, to justify our beliefs, to justify our, you could say, interpretations of the reality we live in. So yes, intuitions are generally accurate, given your standard, given my standard, given anyone's standards, given most people's standards. In mathematics, we have evidence for intuitions being accurate. The statement 2 + 2 = 4 is intuitively true, and that is something which is actually true. So the intuition maps onto that being true. Think of like statements like 1 + 1 = 2. 2 + 2 = 4, 3 + 3 = 6. The list goes on. These things are intuitively true, and they are actually true. So we have a plethora of instances in mathematics. In, for example, physics, it's called intuitive physics. I can get the studies for this. I have plenty of studies about the intuition stuff, by the way, which demonstrates the general accuracy of intuitions across all domains. Even if you talk about Fermat's last theorem and how Andrew Wild's proof corresponds with certain intuitions, that's also strong evidence for intuitions accuracy in mathematics. And I don't need to go on and on and on about an obvious fact, which I've already established in my previous response about the accuracy of intuitions. That's not really going to, add in this sort of like productivity here because we both know, and by we I'm talking about me and UC, we both know you've lost this point. The other part you mentioned, though, so I don't grant the idea that the majority of people back then had the intuition that the thing you were talking about is moral. I think that the legal systems enforced these things to be something which is permissible. However, the legal permissibility of something does not automatically mean that the moral intuitions in that given society generally conforms to that given law. I don't agree with that. So that's just something which is, based off erroneous, flawed, unsubstantiated grounds. Once again, no arguments, again, typical from C at this point. Like, I mean, I can just predict you from the beginning to the current time. You just don't give arguments, man. And also, even if we're to grant the idea that the intuitions were something which were, prevalent back then, we had the intuitions, we had these nasty intuitions. Let's just grant this. Let's just grant this dog water unsubstantiated claim that this underdeveloped ape C just made a while ago, this subhuman filth just claimed, right? Let's just grant this, okay? There's something in epistemology, by the way, which is called epistemic feasibility, right? Which is just to say that one can acknowledge the justification to be credible in one particular instance, while like also simultaneously acknowledging the possibility of such justification being somewhat inaccurate. It's also called epistemic humility, which is why scientists do not make, you could say, apodictically certain claims about the naturalistic world. So when you're going to say to me that, hey, we have these instances of these intuitions being flawed, therefore intuitions is not good evidence, that's retarded. We have instances of our sense experiences being flawed. Think of like multiple illusion experiments. For example, the mirage instance. For example, when you see a mirage, initially we would be under the impression that there's a pool of water at the bottom of the road in the hot sun, when that's not actually the case. And there are multiple different illusion experiments, like the Ebbinghaus illusion experiments and multiple different other experiments like this, which demonstrates the sort of like potential inaccuracy in our intuitions or sensory experiences. It doesn't automatically mean that they're not credible. It just means they're not 100% credible. It just decreases the credibility from 100% to a non-100%. However, the credibility that is related to intuitions, which is related to sense experiences, is still much higher than 50% given the general accuracy. So again, see, you thought you did a gotcha, like you thought that was a gotcha moment when you tried to point out inaccuracy of intuitions in some cases in the domain of ethics. Well, sorry, it was not a gotcha moment. It was actually a gotcha moment for me, because then I found another opportunity to dunk on you on different points regarding this point about the epistemic feasibility stuff. Right, so that's basically it. We have, just to wrap things up, there are one or two instances, perhaps more instances of sense experience being wrong. However, we would definitely agree that sense experiences is accurate, generally speaking, and so it's credible. So pointing out a couple of instances of something being inaccurate does not automatically disqualify from being credible. The other points you can respond, but I don't think you have the knowledge to talk about the evolution part or the mathematics part. So I don't really advise you to go on points you're not really educated on. Well, they're not really any points you're educated on. But yeah, I'm just done talking here. You have more responses, you can go for it, man. Just go.
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, if anybody has any insomnia or sleep-related issues, just listen to Apollo speak. I asked him like a question that required 1 minute or maybe even longer to flesh out, and he spent maybe 5 minutes responding to it. I don't know how it took him that long, but the responses are going to be pretty simple. So if I did say, which is pretty unlikely, but if I did say that you having intuition does not mean that it's true, that was a misspeak, obviously. I meant to say it doesn't mean that it's more likely to be true. It's not probability raising. And I also gave you the counterfactual test, right? Because if something is evidence for something else, then we should look at, if it's the case that this thing didn't exist, will we still have the intuition? Or we still probably have the intuition? And the answer for the case you gave is yes. The answer for the sensory cases, which is like really embarrassing, I don't know why you do this, is no. If it's the case that our sensory intuitions were, not truth tracking, it's very unlikely that we would have these intuitions because they develop from evolution. And evolution gives us these traits that are advantageous to survival, And so if we have this intuition about our senses, for example, if I see a tiger, or if I think I see a tiger in the woods, that would probably be advantageous to my survival. If it's the case that none of these intuitions were truth tracking reliable, they'd probably be discarded. They'd probably lead to me dying because I see things that are not really there. I'd probably end up dying. And then evolutionarily speaking, they'd be discarded because they're not evolutionarily advantageous. But the very fact that they help with survival and they seem to reliably track what's really there, sensorily speaking, is why we have these intuitions. You can't make that same argument for the case you just given, because once again, eating animals, we would have the intuition, even if it's the case that eating animals was immoral. But sensorily speaking, if it was the case that there were no tigers, I doubt we would have intuitions about seeing tigers in the woods. Or if it was the case that there were no predators, I doubt we'd have intuitions about seeing predators in the woods. And so every intuition example you gave of sensory experience and stuff like that is obviously wrong, because I doubt that we'd have these intuitions in an evolutionary standpoint if it's the case that they do not reliably track reality, because we'd just be weeded out by natural selection. In the example of mathematics, I'm really skeptical of the view that you have mathematical intuitions. When you give examples like 2 plus 2 equals 4, 3 plus 3 equals 6, these are just theorems that are derived from axioms, right, of mathematics. So we have these axioms like piano axioms, and then if we say 2 plus 2 equals 4, that's just something that's true by virtue of the axiom. It's not something that we like intuit. If I ask like a 2-year-old that grew up in the Jungle Book, yo man, what's 2 plus 2? They're probably not going to tell you 4. They're going to have this intuitive view that 2 plus 2 equals 4 unless they have an understanding of the framework of the axioms that underlay that truth. I have a 4-year-old sister. She probably does not know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And if she does know that, she does not know it because of some intuitive basis. She probably knows it because I've told her that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So I'm pretty skeptical of that. And that's just a broad response to the mathematical stuff. The Fermat theorem stuff that you also mentioned, I don't know what you're talking about. You can maybe send that to me. I'm not really interested in seeing it though. To be honest, this debate's been going on way too long. I'm kind of bored now.
Are you sure Apollo isn't attracted to your 4-year-old sister? Are you sure Apollo isn't attracted to your 4-year-old sister? Fucking pedophile bitch, faggot bitch.
What happened? What happened? Oh. Anyway, I don't know what was being said. Anyways, I'll just like continue. I mean, there was probably a lot more stuff that he said. I was playing ABA, like I loaded up the game again because he was just chatting a lot of shit. I'm gonna see if I can remember in like 5 seconds. He was saying, he called into question whether most people had those intuitions. Like, I find that insane. If you just look at history, you know, suffragette movement, you know, suffragists, you know, women had to fight for their rights. You know, there were uproar and they were pretty unpopular. They were the minority that held this view. I can give you writers that speak about these sorts of things, that speak about how widespread these were. Look at like Charles Dickens, look at Hale. They speak about how women didn't really have much rights. If you talk about like Nazi Germany, I'm not entirely sure how you can make this sort of argument that people didn't have these intuitions, especially given the fact that the people like the Gestapo thrived off of people snitching on other niggas next to them for having intuitions contrary to what Hitler had, or people like the Hitler Youth, right, that took kids and, you know, indoctrinated them into the Hitler Defense Force or whatever you fucking call it, right? There was like widespread radicalization of kids and giving them these sorts of moral beliefs. But just because it's the case that these are widespread and that they have these moral beliefs culturally speaking does not mean necessarily that, you know, these moral beliefs are now truth tracking. As a matter of fact, I don't even think this intuition that most people have about, you know, killing people like Jews and stuff are even evolutionary. I think that they're cultural. And in the same way, I think that this veganism dispute is probably mostly cultural, right? Because if we really take an analysis of what we believe in, we probably believe that we shouldn't cause unnecessary harm, and we probably believe in these things well and strongly probably apply them. And so, you know, I just think it's most people just not giving a deep analysis of their own belief system and really evaluating it properly. I think that's probably what's going on there. I don't think it has anything to do with evolution. I evolved, presumably. I don't know if you evolved. I evolved. I don't think eating animals is okay, unless it's the case that it's necessary for my survival, which is what evolution's all about. And so there's just a disconnect between the evolutionary intuition, which is, look, eat animals if it's advantageous to your survival, which it was back then, and now the intuition about eating animals if it's advantageous to your survival, which is not the case now, because, well, you can not eat animals and have the same sort of advantages to your survival. And if you need to eat animals for whatever reason, maybe you're poor, you can't afford the vegan stuff, and it's not like an insult, like maybe you actually just can't afford the vegan lifestyle. It's probably more expensive than the meat eater lifestyle. I don't really know. And so you need to have the nutrients through eating meat, and that's fine. That's also accommodated under my view. Eat meat if you need to eat meat. And that's the evolutionary intuition. But if you don't need to eat meat, why would you slaughter things and cause excess suffering when you don't have to do it? It just seems completely fucking irrational. But this is a repetition. Do you want to conclude? You know, like, do you want to conclude? Let's just conclude, man. You know?
Yeah, it's just funny, you know. You didn't have to take like 15 minutes just to yap about a whole bunch of nothing. But before I conclude, I just want to make it clear to everyone in this chat right now that I can't post comments because, you know, the anti-Apollo agenda, it's just crazy, man. They had to report me because I'm destroying this guy, you know. Now I can't even text it all on Discord. I have limited access. I can send a screenshot of my different accounts. So there goes that one account. Now to address the point, he's getting busy right now for the time being. It's just crazy. The coping is just embarrassing, man. When you can't actually, address arguments, you have to like step in for your friend and like report the person's account. But I can still talk and I can still demolish these other points. You don't think for some reason that we have the mathematical intuition that 2 plus 2 equals 4. You don't think people, if you ask the average person, hey bro, do you think 2 plus 2 equals 4? They're gonna be like, yeah, of course, that's obvious. 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? I'm not saying the truth maker of these mathematical propositions or the intuitions. I'm saying it's a valid epistemic device to be utilized to basically know the facts. Okay, we can use the epistemic device of the intuitions to be aware of the axioms and to then correlate the mathematical sentence to the axiom to see if it is actually satisfied by the axioms. So you're not really understanding the point. It's not a truth maker conversation. It's an epistemological type of conversation as it pertains to this particular point we're on. Now, you have not proven the intuitions part again. You've not actually demonstrated why this is not in fact credible. I've given the opposing reasons as to why this is credible. I could draw the links, the studies. I have at least 15 links at the very least. And studies which demonstrates the general accuracy of intuitions. But as I've said, someone, because they knew for a fact to post these links to debunk and destroy they had to report my account to make sure I can't text in chat or in any chat whatsoever. So I'd have to go on the different accounts. But by that time the debate will be finished. I don't even think I need to post those links because I've already explicated on the reasoning behind my claims without even having to present any supposed links for them. Not really addressed anything really. And yeah, the yappery can't really talk about snooze fest when you have no charisma whatsoever. You have no audience appeal. It's just terrible. It's like, honestly, it really is. If you want to have the conclusions right now, since you proposed the conclusions, you can go first, give your conclusions. I'll give my conclusions afterwards, then we can just wrap things up, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, also, I mean, look, if the intuition point is just saying, like, do most people agree with these intuitions, or agree with these mathematical propositions because of their intuition, I'll just say no. I don't think so. I think most people think that 2 plus 2 equals 4, either because they think it's like a tautology, like 2 plus 2 is just an expression of 4, so it's just like saying it's 4, and that's why there's an equal sign there or something, or they just are aware of the fact that it's just an axiom, and so it's derived from an axiom, so like it's obviously true, given what mathematics is, given the axiom of mathematics, that this thing follows. I don't think they think it's true because they have this like innate feeling that this 2 plus 2 expression equals 4, right? And once again, you can test this like babies. Babies don't understand mathematical truths. As a matter of fact, Piaget, which is like a pretty popular psychologist, if you do any sort of psychology in school, you will learn about Piaget. Piaget states that children only become aware of mathematical truths and stuff like that and reason about them well at the age of 7 in his theory of development. And so like even the idea that you can have like knowledge of and like actual proper rational awareness of these mathematical truths before this point is a bit skeptical from most psychologists. I mean, I don't think 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds or 1-year-olds have these intuitions. They probably have intuitions about other things that are evolutionarily advantageous, probably, just not these sorts of things. But I mean, that's probably like a repetition as well. I'm just going to give my conclusion because I've been here for a while. Look, man, it's me, guys. It's C. C's the name. Debating's my game. I came here to defend the corporation. Apollo debates he was lying a lot, and I just don't really like when people lie. So I said, let's debate right now. He wanted to do veganism. I wasn't particularly interested, but I said, okay, we could have done any other topic. The result would have been the same. Fully of mind, theism, anything. But anyway, let's get to the actual conclusion. I'm rambling a bit. Basically, I open up the conversation with a very, very uncontroversial principle. If there's a situation where I'm needlessly multiplying suffering, right? There's no need to do it. It's wrong. It's immoral. You shouldn't do it, right? Very uncontroversial. He said, what's the argument for that? His brain just automatically transformed into fucking debate mode, right? He said, it's game time, ready to duel, fucking transformed. I'm like, okay, I mean, I can give you like lots of cases and we can look at the symmetries. And it seems like the morally salient feature in most of these cases is that we find it immoral to do this thing. And he was like, yeah, man, I think we can find it immoral in these cases, but why in the veganism case? And I was like, what's the symmetry breakup? It just seems like a special plead. You agree with it generally, which he agrees to, but he doesn't agree with it in this case specifically for no good reason. And he kept trying to ask me for an argument. You already agreed to like the fucking steps. You just don't want to get to the conclusion. You agree with it generally. This is another case within the generals, right? Do you agree with this? If yes, then we agree. Let's shake hands. If no, why? You can't tell me why. It's unparsimonious, right? You're just making this exception for no reason. The particular response doesn't help him here. because it doesn't respond to my objection at all. About whether he agrees with it in this case. Just because you're particulars, at least under my view, doesn't mean that you need to abandon justification for moral thought. If you do, then your moral thoughts and moral beliefs are just unjustified. I don't know why anyone would ever take that position over my position where they are justified. And if you don't agree with it, you agree, okay, well, yeah, my moral thoughts can have justifications for them, then you would agree with what I'm saying here. Because my whole point is that the reason why you agree in these cases is because of this justification. And so you should probably agree in those other cases too. Yeah, man. I mean, apart from the unparsimonious stuff, the theoretical virtue point he didn't respond to. He also made some claims about, if you go to the gym and you see like a really buff guy, and he's eating the chicken in the gym, he doesn't really have an issue eating the chicken in the gym. He's enjoying himself eating the chicken in the gym. Or if you ask lots of people in society, hey man, do you think like eating meat is wrong or something? They might tell you no. And it's like, this is like good evidence for his view. But like, first of all, it's not fucking good evidence for his view. Just because they enjoy the meat, as he was saying, like they enjoy the meat, doesn't mean that what they're doing is right. Back in the day, there were probably lots of people that raped their wives, and this is the whole point of the example. Back in the day, like marriage rape, like raping your like wife in marriage, only became illegal within the last 50 years in many countries, in many first world countries. I'm pretty sure in the UK it became illegal like 1990 or something. Like it's very fucking recent developments. Hundreds of years ago, people were doing this on the regular, right? And if you ask those people, do you think you're doing anything wrong? Mid-stroke, they'd tell you no. They'd say, yeah, this is good shit. You feel me? I'm fucking with this, right? That doesn't mean that what you're doing is correct at all. It's like a really low-tier fucking argument to even like suggest that also what it means. It doesn't mean that at all. In the same way, it just applies the same in the vegan case. I don't think that because a lot of people are vegans, that's evidence to you not being vegan. I just think a lot of people are probably irrational, or they just haven't deeply analyzed their own belief states yet. And also, yeah, like enjoying meat. Like I don't know why he went into so much detail. That's pretty gay. He asked me to justify why it's the case that this thing was something a majority of people believed in. I gave the Hitler Youth dedicated a lot of their time to indoctrinating kids and indoctrinating children. And that's why, the Hitler ideology was so widespread. The Gestapo thrived on people telling them which other niggas near them, like which neighbors of theirs didn't agree with Hitler, so the Gestapo could come and snake them and slime them. That's like another example of like, how the Gestapo thrived in that era because people agreed with them, and that's why they helped them out. That's why they cooperated. What else? I mean, I think his name's Christian Hale. He writes a lot about women's rights at the time. Pretty fucking prolific writer. Charles Dickens talks about it a lot. There are like many writers that just talk about these sorts of things and talk about how widespread it was. And so it seems to be the case that these intuitions were widespread. I don't know why anyone would disagree with that point either. And nonetheless, people still say those things are wrong. I mean, what else is there to really say? I mean, look, I just don't think he gave any like super responses. My argument is just that in cases where you need to eat meat, eat meat. If you can't afford vegan diet, eat meat. If you're trapped on an island of Sakazuki and you don't want to eat Sakazuki because he's Krishna, eat meat. Eat meat when you need to eat meat. If you're going to eat meat, if you have access to a vegan diet and there's a chicken in front of you, and he's staring at you with big eyes, or like there's a horse in front of you, get it because Apollo got crushed by a cork who transformed into a horse in his DMs or something, you don't have to kill the horse. You don't have to kill the horse. So you can just eat the vegetable, you can eat the cabbage, you can eat the garlic, whatever you want to eat. And you can just leave the fucking animals alone. And then we just have less suffering all around. Unless you're fatty like Apollo spiritually and need to eat meat for no reason. So yeah, that's my conclusion, guys. If you guys like conclusions like this, subscribe to Shino's channel, Discord Debates. There are a lot of Discord debates on Shino's channel. Subscribe to him. Shout Ristan, shout Yanni, shout all my people, shout Gyro, shout Vortex, shout everybody. Hello everybody, shout Shikyo. Yeah, that's my conclusion, man.
Yeah, so just to give my conclusions, just first and foremost, I would just a whole bunch of yap, 1/4 of 4P quality rhetoric at best. Just to address not really address, but to give a comprehensive conclusion on the debate itself. Yeah, so D gave fragile justification for the claim that it's a basic principle. And he talks about the idea of me basically making special exceptions, special pleading, like he says, I don't think he even understands the special pleading even this. Like, it's very clear that he's cognitively incapable of wrapping his head around that concept, which is why he's wrongfully, you could say, accused me of special pleading, as he likes to call it, because why specifically pointed out the overwhelming amount of intuitions which would justify it being the case that this would be an exception. Not to mention, he tried to lie about some agreements I made. He tried to say, well, you agree this is generally true. I never agree that, generally speaking, this is true. What I told you is that we can grant the idea that people believe that this is generally true will still not be evidence considering the intuitions. So establishing the possibility of the vast majority agreeing with your position or agreeing with a particular point to basically point out as to why your position would still fail. It's not me specifically agreeing at that specific point. You're not really understanding, right? You're not really understanding anything, aren't you? Just to address another thing, you also talked about the idea of it being the case that the intuitions is not good evidence. These are not good evidence. It's not something which has any sort of, you could say, credible, competent epistemic role in your philosophical paradigm. That's not even true. So you don't even believe that yourself because you're appealing to intuitions multiple times. Your own argument for, you could say, the idea of this being a basic principle, it being reasonable, is based off intuitions. You appealed so many times to intuitions. You even tried to pull up a statistic and you dropped the statistic point, by the way, I realized that for sure. So you dropped that point regarding the statistical, you could say, justification for that claim because you realized that you could not further demonstrate any sources or any credibility back in those statistics. They're just made up stuff, perhaps. The other part regarding the idea of the justification that you're trying to press me on, I don't need to give justification for my position because I'm not the one who is arguing for a specific explicit claim here. I was placing into consideration, or sorry, into question whether or not your claim was correct. But I mean, given the supposed responses I've given, I think the evidence favors my position, and that, if anything, are the opposing position. I think there's not really that much to add other than, your whole rhetoric, your whole strategy is just to accuse me of being a pedophile or accuse me of dating femboy or all of this weird stuff, doing these accusations and so forth. I don't know if, by Discord standards it's convincing, but I mean, by normal people standards who are not NPCs, it really isn't, because it just makes it come off as if you can't focus on the arguments, you only can focus on the insults because your brain is only built for the insults, not arguments. You're not intelligent enough to focus on the arguments. And not to mention your insults aren't even good, and you don't even sound good. It's really terrible. I think the mathematical points, you talk about the idea of, well, according to this person, children develops intuitions at age 7 for math. That's irrelevant, you fucktard. You can grant the idea that intuitions aren't fully fleshed out and developed at a young age, and it would still be the case that intuitions are genuinely credible. These are two compatible points. It's like you brought up a study which had no relevancy to decreasing the general accuracy or debunking the general accuracy of intuitions. It's just a whole bunch of non-point, a whole bunch of rambling, a whole bunch of prevarication and distortion, and just no actual substance, just pontification, really. I mean, that's really just it. I have nothing else to add other than you just got dunked on, and you have to basically shout at your friends because you know for a fact that if you shout them out, then they would say in the comment section that you won to basically feed their ego after we do in fact both know we got destroyed in this conversation. But I'm done talking. OP Dengue, you said after this debate you'll give me the recording of the other debate, so send me that recording if you have it. And make sure to send me this recording of Seagate and Pissed On. I would love to see that shit too. Yeah, that's basically it, guys.
Nobody asked you have no